The story you're about to experience is inspired by real events, so sit back, relax, and get ready for an unforgettable journey. It was the kind of small town where secrets festered beneath layers of politeness and tradition, tucked away from the prying eyes of the world. Maple Hollow, with its neat rows of colonial houses and a church steeple that scraped the sky, seemed idyllic to outsiders. But for those who lived there, it was a place where whispers carried like the wind, and silence was a survival skill. For Caroline Adler, Maple Hollow was home. She had spent all 23 years of her life here, working as a librarian at the town's modest library. The books offered an escape from the monotony of the small town life, but nothing could quell the growing sense of unease that had taken root in her heart. It all started one crisp autumn evening when Caroline decided to take the long way home from work. The sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The air was thick with the scent of fallen leaves and impending rain. As she turned onto Sycamore Lane, she noticed something strange, a figure standing perfectly still under the streetlight. The figure was a man, his face obscured by the brim of a wide hat. He was dressed in clothes that seemed out of place for the modern era, a long dark coat and polished boots that clicked against the pavement when he walked. Caroline's heart skipped a beat when she realized he was watching her. She quickened her pace, clutching her bag tightly. The man didn't follow her, but his presence lingered in her thoughts, long after she reached the safety of her apartment. That night she dreamt of him, standing under the streetlight, his shadow stretching impossibly long, whispering words she couldn't understand. Over the next few days, the sightings continued. No matter where she went, the man seemed to appear. At the edge of the library parking lot, across the street from the coffee shop, even outside her bedroom window one late night. She tried to convince herself it was a coincidence, but deep down, she knew better. Caroline confided in her best friend, Sophie, who worked at the local diner. "You're probably just imagining things," Sophie said, though her tone betrayed her unease. "But if it makes you feel any better, you can stay at my place for a while." Grateful for the offer, Caroline packed an overnight bag and spent a few nights at Sophie's apartment above the diner. For a brief moment, she felt safe, but the reprieve didn't last. One evening, while Sophie was working a late shift, Caroline heard a noise outside the apartment. She peeked through the blinds and felt her stomach drop. The man was standing across the street, staring up at her. His hat cast a shadow over his face, but she could feel his eyes boring into her. Panicked, she called the police. By the time they arrived, the man was gone. The officer who took her statement was polite but dismissive, chalking it up to an overreactive imagination. "It's probably just someone passing through," he said. "Let us know if you see him again." Caroline knew she couldn't live like this. She decided to dig into the town's history, hoping to find a clue about her stalker. What she discovered chilled her to the bone. Decades ago, a man named Elias Mercer had lived in Maple Hollow. He was a traveling salesman who had a reputation of being charming, but was suspected of several disappearances. The townsfolk eventually took matters into their own hands, forming a mob to confront him. Elias was dragged from his home and hanged under the very streetlight where Caroline had seen him first. His body was never recovered, and rumors of his vengeful spirit had persisted ever since. Caroline didn't believe in ghosts, but the similarities were too striking to ignore. Determined to put an end to the nightmare, she sought out the eldest resident in town, Mrs. Hargrove, who had lived through Maple Hollow's darkest days. "You've seen him, haven't you?" Mrs. Hargrove said when Caroline mentioned Elias Mercer's name. Her voice trembled, and her wrinkled hands clutched a rosary. "He's been waiting, biding his time. You need to leave, child. Leave and never look back." But it was too late. That night, Caroline's worst fears were realized. She awoke to the sound of footsteps in her apartment. Her heart pounded as she reached for her phone, only to find it dead. The footsteps grew louder and closer until they stopped outside her bedroom door. The doorknob turned slowly. Caroline's scream caught in her throat as the door creaked open, revealing Elias Mercer, his face a ghastly mask of decay and malice. He raised a gloved hand and whispered the words she had heard in her dreams. The next morning, Sophie found Caroline's apartment empty. Her belongings were untouched, but there was no sign of her. The only clue was a single note scrawled in Caroline's handwriting. He found me. To this day, Maple Hollow residents claim to see a figure standing under the streetlight on Sycamore Lane, waiting. They say he's searching for his next victim, and his shadow grows longer with each passing year. And though Caroline Adler was never found, her story serves as a chilling reminder. Some fates are worse than death. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to check out the description below for ways to stay connected and support the channel. Your support means the world.